You're righty there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things Oldhammer related, and welcome to another video from me, Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. In this video, I'm going to be doing another unit for Jason from Bring About Wargaming's Emperor's Children Army. It's going to be a unit as Chaos veterans, so I'm going to be trying something to make them look a little bit special and stand out amongst all the other Chaos Space Marine squads that there's going to be for this army. So grab yourself your cuppa, and let's get to it. Firstly, I would just like to apologise for my recent absence from YouTube. I've been trying to get some commissions sorted that have piled up on my desk, and now I've finally got those cleared and I can get back to YouTube. And I've got a few videos lined up that I'm really hoping people are going to enjoy as much as I'm going to enjoy doing them. One of which is going to be the starting of a project that I've wanted to do since my teens, and that is going to be involving a game system which some people might say is the most epic game system that Games Workshop ever released. Anyway, for this video, what I'm going to be doing, like I said, is another unit for Jason from Bring About Wargaming's Emperor's Children Army that I've started a little while ago. And that is going to be a unit of Chaos Space Marine veterans. And to try and make these units look a little bit special, what I did was I turned to the 2nd edition Chaos Codex to get some inspiration. So let's get to the desk and go through the Codex and have a look at some of the ideas that I was going for. Chaos Space Marine veterans are a bit more special than the standard Chaos Space Marines. And to represent this, they actually have a higher weapon skill and ballistic skill than the normal ones. They also have a couple of extra rules, which allow them to fight in a dispersed formation, which allows them to be 4 inches apart instead of 2 and still maintain squad coherency. And they're also allowed to infiltrate, which allows them to actually get right up into the enemy's face and cause havoc right from the get-go. Now, to try and show these guys as being a little bit more special, I wanted to do something a bit different for them. So for that, what I did was I turned to the Chaos Codex's full colour section. And this has some absolutely brilliant artwork in it and examples of painted models, including these 2 examples here of tentacles that have been sculpted on. So I thought I'd try and give these a go with some green stuff, and I thought I'd show you the process of how I did it, and right at the end you can see whether or not I've managed to pull it off. So let's get to the desk and see how I do. Of the 2 tentacle ones in the Codex, the first one I'm going to try is this one here. Now for that, he's also going to have the plasma gun for that as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pin this arm to that side first, because these come off very easily when glued to each other. So I'm just going to simply use a little bit of paper clip, which I'm going to cut down, and I've got a drill bit which I've got figured out for the right size just by comparing them to the paper clip, and a Dremel sort of thing, an electric hand drill. And I'm going to start by going into the centre of this one first and going carefully. And if you just start off with minimal pressure to begin with, and then work in there, you can see the lines start to appear, especially on these older lead models. And then when you're happy with where it is, just carefully go in. Don't try and get a weird angle on it, because you will snap the drill bit. Now we're going to want a pin on the other side as well. We're going to drill that in as well. There we go. Once you've drilled the holes, check that the paper clip fits in nice and easily. And it's got a little bit of wiggle room, which is always nice. And I'm just going to carefully drill it in on the plastic shoulder. Again, aim for roughly the centre of it. And really, you just want to be careful you don't drill straight through these. I've got a pair of decent snips for cutting paper clips. You don't want to use your good flush cutters for your miniature cutting, because they will be damaged by the paper clip. It's a good idea to do a dry run. I've cut this way too long, I know that. And then cut it to length as best you can, whilst being careful not to snip yourself. Remember, do a dry run. Before you put any glue in, it's a good idea. Yeah, that's good. I'm happy with that. A nice fit. So then what I will do is, it's a good idea to put super glue on something else when you're doing it. Anything will do. I just use the lid of my pot of paper clips. And you take one end of it like that, and put that straight in your hole in the first one, like that. And if it's usually use a scratchy end, get some more super glue on the bit, around it, and then put the piece in. The reason I'm doing this bit first is because we're going to put the tentacle on this side and we're going to use a paper clip as the framework for it. But once we've got the tentacle on there, we don't want to be pressing on and trying to glue this arm on, so it's better to glue this arm on now. Get that out of the way, and if you want, a bit of super glue activator is always a good idea. Again, like I said, just touch it where you want it, like that. You can get it in there quite nicely then. There you go, so that's the plasma gun glued in place. So the way I'm going to try and do this is I'm going to use a paper clip as the frame for it. So I'm going to stick an oversized length of paper clip into the hole first that I've drilled and get it roughly into the place that I want. Make sure it's in there properly. Make sure it's where I want it. Got this position here. And super glue activator. Now looking at the picture in the codex, at least the best one that I can see, it looks like it sort of curls down and in and maybe has a little hook on it. Now the hook on the end of it, that we can add ourselves just without having to the framework. So basically what I want is this thing to bend down that way, come out, and then come forward, come at a sharp angle, come down just in front of his leg, then curl up a bit. And we're also going to use this shoulder pad over the top of it. We're going to want to fill that in and make sure it bends down within there. Now for this, because we're not cutting it, I am going to use a pair of my older GW flush cutters. There you go. I'm going to use a pair of older GW flush cutters for this. Not because we're cutting them through it, so I'm not too worried about damaging, but because it would be quite nice to help get a bend on there. I'm hoping anyway. So let's try and get the basic shape that we want. This needs to bend down. Yeah, that looks about right. And he wants to get a curve on it. Let's see what we can do. If we look at the picture, it looks like it goes to about his knee in a gentle curve. Let's try this shoulder pad on here again. Make sure it's all still in the position that we want. Yeah. And then we can try and bend this with our fingers. So let's see what we can do. About there. And then we want a bit more of an exaggerated kink on it just here. About there-ish, I'd say. We also know how long we're going to want this roughly now, so we can cut this off with our good flush cutters, well, with our heavy dutier flush cutters. That's going to be about there. Now what we want to try and do is get a sharp bend on this bit here. So let's see if we can do this, shall we? There you go, a bit more of a twist. And let's try and get this out. There we go. That's just going to be the framework. I'm going to build up off that shoulder pad coming off there, the tentacle coming off from there, looping around that. Lovely motorbike. So yeah, we're going to have it with the shoulder pad on here, looping round there, kind of like we see in the picture, coming round, and then have a little flick off there. What I'm going to do first of all is put a little bit more super glue on here because all that bending around has loosened the super glue bond. Now ready to try and sculpt on the tentacle from there. Right, the way I'm going to attempt this is I'm going to start off by putting a larger piece across this wire armature that we've put in here. And sort of roll it into a sausage and sort of just squidge it into it and get it into shape. This doesn't have to be neat at all, this is just our base foundation to build up of. We're going to use our sculpting tools and we're just going to get this into the basic shape that we want. And that little seam down the middle we can use a little bit to our advantage as well when it comes to it if we want, but we will see how that works out. As I say, it doesn't just be neat, we're just getting this into our rough shape that we want and fixed in place with our shoulder pad on there. Right, we can hold this out a fair bit, but that's fine. There we go. That is the shape we roughly want for our tentacle. I think maybe look down a little bit more. Okay, about there. I'd say about there is where we want that. Okay. That's right, we've got a fair bit of filling out to do on the shoulder still. I do want this actually to get quite a bit thinner. What we can do is just twist it round and knead it into the shape that we want. There we go. Now I'm going to start building up off this by making thin sausages and sort of attaching them to it. We're going to roll out a cut, like some very, very thin sausages and just build them up. Start by putting this on the outside. It will follow around. And keep doing that and building them up. And as I cut each of these thin strands of green stuff, I'll lay them down next to each other and press them into place to try and copy that sort of sinewy, tentacle-y look that's on the one in the Codex. And you just press them into shape and use the stickiness of the green stuff to hold them and just work them round into place until you're happy with them. And we should be back with this once I've finished and we'll see how I've done. And here it is with the finished tentacle. What I've done is where the shoulder pad goes, I've padded it out with some little bits until it's filled up the underside of the shoulder pad and holds that in nicely, like that. As well as I've sculpted in some little tiny bits just in the corners there, so it looks like a little bit of muscly sinew. There you go, when you put the shoulder pad on, it sits out. And what I've done is I've rolled out some real thin sausages, put it on the outside of the infill with the green stuff that we did, and then I've twisted them round at the end. Tried doing one going a bit lengthways across it. Now at the moment it looks a little bit meh, to me at least it does, but it might look better when it's primed up. So there it is, primed up. Now I think it looks a little bit better, but I have to be honest, I'm not exactly satisfied with my first attempt on this one. But we shall see what it looks like once paint's been applied. So it might make it look a little bit better once that's been done. Second tentacle guy I'm going to attempt to do is this guy here. Now you've got a couple of photos in the Chaos Codex of the angles. You can see you've got one side on and one front on. So looking at this, you can, well, I'm guessing it looks like it's 3 tentacles. You've got one that comes out mainly to the front and droops down in front of his leg. Then you've got another one next to that that comes to the front, is the one that loops round to hold the bolter, or in this case, plasma gun. And then you've got one that's looping out over the top and doing a quick one in. So I've pinned on the bolter arm here like I did in the previous marine, as well as pinned on the shoulder here and cut the lower part of the arm off. It was one of these hands. So it's one of the hands that would normally hold out the bolter anyway. So I've simply cut that off with a pair of flush cutters, and that is where I'm going to fix the green stuff to. And here's my green stuff. So to do this, what I'm going to try and do, instead of rolling the shapes out to the tentacles, I'm going to try and sort of tease it out. Because looking on the pictures, they look to have a bit of a triangle-y shape to them. So I'm going to try and tease this out roughly to the right shape. I'm going to have the Codex right in front of me as well for reference. And I'm going to be flicking between the 2 pages to have a good look and see which one's which. Fairly chunky, to be honest, but you don't want to make it too chunky, obviously. Hold it up to the model and see what you got for a comparison. Yeah, that's not too bad. Let's come out a fair bit more. Keep lining it up, see where you're at. Okay, I'm reasonably happy with that. So I'm going to use my knife to cut this off. That's one that we want. And we want the next one's going to come off from the front, and the one that's going to wrap around the bolter. Goes to a little bit more of a point, but not too much. There you go. We can line that up, sort of come out and twist round and loop round the bolter. Got quite a bit to loop around, so this is going to want to be a fairly longer tentacle, maybe a bit longer. Okay, go with that. And then we want the little short one on top. Good thing is, if you want to as well, you can try and line this one up on top of the Codex to see, because the pictures are about 1 to 1. I think that's about right there. Then from here, I think what I'm going to start with is the one that's going to go round and hold on to the plasma gun. And one of the tools I've got to do this is these things. You can get sculpting tools specifically for resin and clay, I believe, that are like this, but these are actually from my missus. And she uses them for nail art. I think she uses them for doing little dots on her nails. You can also use these to put little holes and that lot in your green stuff. So I'm going to try that out. Start with this one. Okay. I'm going to put that about there. And get a modelling tool to sort of get that smushed on there. Because green stuff is adhesive. And then again, flicking between pages, I would say this one comes out with more of an exaggerated curl on it. There we go, so let's put that to like there. And then wrap it round. Go to, let's do it round here, holding it in. And I'm going to go in around the back and start sculpting this on, pushing it down. We can add to this later on as well. And I would say what I'm going to try and do is snick off a little bit on the end here, being careful because this craft knife is sharp. There we go. And then trying to make that into more of a point, and that's one tentacle wrapped round. There we go. I'm going to take the next one. I think this one does want to be a bit thinner, to be honest. We're going to try and add that shape to it. There we go. I'm happy with that. And here we go. Let's take our tool and get this into place where we want it. Roughly about there. There we go. And then sculpt this into place. I think what we want is for this one to come out like that. Curls in on itself and then comes up a bit. Okay. I think that might be a bit long. So what we can do is take a bit of scissors, pair of scissors, snip, and even whilst it's on here still, you can try and reshape that a little bit. There we go. I'd say patience is definitely a key with this. There we go. And then we want our smaller tentacle. If we can even use this tool here to, we can. It looks like it's erupting out of his armor. Again, I'm going to go with that. Now let's smooth it in. Now it's a case of filling in as best you can, or at least this is how I think how I can do it. We'll start by putting little bits and building up. Oh, there, so if we want that in there, we'll put this here, and then start smoothing it round. We should be back when I've got that filled in and smoothed in. In between the tentacles, I'm going to use this same tool with a little round end, and I'm going to start sculpting in separation. So I've been filling it in with little bits adding in there, and then I'm going to make it look like they're all one tentacle in the center that's separated off. You basically use this, make sure it's wet, and I'm going to use it to sort of force in the groove so it looks like they're one tentacle down the base there like that, then they split off to three. Okay, and I'm going to keep trying to work backwards and forwards until it looks as seamless as I can get it, swapping between different tools. So I've got ones like this one as well for smoothing out. There we go. And now before it cures, I'm going to take these same tools with little ball ends, and I'm going to push them in here, and I'm going to try and make little sucker cups of different sizes. So I've got a couple of different sizes here. Start with this one. Just a case of push it in and give it sort of a, there you go, like that. It doesn't have to be hard, just a bit of a twist. There you go. And I'm going to do this over a few little random spots with different size ones, and just see what it looks like. I should be back when that is done. And here it is all cured before I put the layer of primer on there. This one I'm a lot more happy with than the first attempt. It's still not as close to the Codex one as I would have liked, but it's not bad. And so with a layer of primer on it, it looks pretty decent. Doesn't look too bad at all, I don't think. Inside there works quite well, and it's holding onto the gun nicely. So this one I'm a lot more pleased with than my first attempt, but even so, they're both pretty good. When it comes to painting these guys up, I'm going to start the same way that I did the Dreadnought and their Exalted Champion, by building up the purples with the airbrush, and I'm going to be starting with Phoenician Purple. Just work this into all over where the armour's going to be, and this will work kind of like doing a black base coat, in that if you make sure you get this darker purple right in there, then when you're doing subsequent coats of the lighter purple, if you miss little bits, it just looks like shadow. It can be a bit fiddly to try and get the paint into all of the areas, but no more fiddly, if you ask me, than trying to do it with a paintbrush and reaching with a paintbrush handle into all tiny little nooks and crannies. It's just about angling the model in such a way that you can get the spray where you want it. And once you've practiced at this a little bit, you'll find it's not really that hard. Like I said, it's certainly, I don't consider it any more difficult than trying to get into all of the little nooks and crannies with a paintbrush. With that, I'm then next up moving on to Chaos Purple after that's done. Now this, I'm going to use it to cover pretty much everything we've just done, except the deepest areas. And this is quite easy to accomplish, to be honest. Just don't be as precise where you're spraying it. So just sort of do it from a little distance and just spray it on there, basically. And you'll naturally just miss the deeper recesses as this builds up. Next up, what I'm going to do is Gene Stealer Purple. I'm going to apply that with the airbrush by holding it at a 45-degree angle to the model and sort of spraying from top to bottom down. That way I should hopefully be able to miss the darkest recesses and keep them dark. I am also at certain areas going to try to be more targeted with the airbrush as well. Make sure I get certain areas like on the shoulder pads and on the ends of the power packs of theirs. And the final purple for the base coats is Cacophony Purple. Now that one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it from directly top down, as well as trying to be quite targeted onto areas like the top of his shoulder pads here. And just gently sort of ease it on there, and whilst it does look quite bright to begin with, it does fade down. Make sure you get the front of his head, you want that to be nice and bright, as well as try and target anywhere like on his sides, like the tops of his gloves like that, try and target them in, and anywhere else that you want to have some particular brightness to it. And once you get a hang of a bit of trigger control, it's not that difficult really to target in. And there you can see on the back how you get these transitions that will come in. You can do this very nicely with a paintbrush. You can either do it with wet blending or you can do it with stippling and dry brushing. I just prefer using an airbrush just because I find it quicker. Yeah, you can use whichever tool to apply the paint that you like the best, really. After all those purples have been laid down for the base coats, I'm going to put a wash on to help add some definition to the purple armour and tone it down just a smidge. And for that, what I'm going to use is 4 parts contrast medium to 1 part contrast paint Megos Purple. And we're going to paint this all over the entire surface, trying to concentrate it more into the recesses. You don't want to put this on so thick that you're getting pooling and tea and coffee staining, but you do want to make sure that it gets on there well enough to collect in the recesses nicely, whilst at the same time being all over the surface of the purple there and helping to, just like I say, tone it down just a smidge. I'm going to try and be nice and quick for these base coats because they're the same colours basically as I've done for the Exalted Champion and the Chaos Dreadnought video, which hopefully I remember to be able to put a card up for about here. So the next thing I'm going to do is pick out all the gold trim, and for that I'm going to be using Vallejo's Liquid Metal Rich Gold again. That's the alcohol-based paint that I like that requires isopropyl alcohol to clean your brushes off. Do not use water because it won't work. And I'm just going to do most of the trim in this. I'm going to leave some of them plain because I'm going to do them in silver. And basically, because these guys all have got different trim on them, you can pick whichever trim you like, and I'm just going to go around and pick the ones I particularly like at this stage. Continuing on with the metallics, I'm going to be using lead belcher. I'm just going to paint that on areas on the gun and any areas on piping and backpacks I may want on as well. Now, each one of these different sculpts for the Chaos Space Marines have got different details on them. This one in particular, if you can see, has got a couple of grenades on it hidden away. So I'm going to paint these up in certain bits as well. Now, like I said, each of the different sculpts has different details on them. Some of them have got nothing around their pouches and belts at all, whilst others have got quite a bit. So all I can say is, if you're doing these ones, is to just have a very careful look around them and see what you can see. After the lead belcher, I'm going to move on to using Balthasar Gold, and I'm going to use that on any of the areas that I'd like to be a sort of a brassy colour. And the other good thing with these being Chaos is that even if you have a couple of the same backpacks, just paint different areas, different metallic. That way it adds a nice bit of variety to your army scheme. Next up, I'm going to use some Screaming Bell, but this is going to be used for this one in particular because on here he actually has these tusks sculpted onto him. And I'd quite like these to stand out a bit, so I'm going to paint these into a more reddy brass colour, which the Screaming Bell is perfect for. And then finally I'm going to use Ironbreaker, and I'm going to put that on any of these little skull ornamentations that are around him. I'm also going to put it on some chains that you might have or anything like that. And it is, again, entirely up to you which ones you do. You could do these skulls in a gold colour, you could do it wherever you wanted. It's just I am choosing to do them in Ironbreaker. After the metallics, I'm going to do the weapons casing. Now I've done this same colour over the bolters and the chain swords as well. And what this is a mix of black and blue, mostly black, so there's just the tiniest hint of blue. Now I've used is Abaddon Black and Kaldor Sky, but you can really use any blue you like, it doesn't really matter. And this will just help to add a little bit of a tint to it. It also makes it a bit more interesting than just plain black. And when we add the highlights, you'll see what I mean, a bit like that. I'm also going to use this same mix on this grenade here. Now again, like I said, this is all entirely optional and up to you. If you have anything like that, why not? I'm just going to whiz through what base colours I've used very quickly, because like I said, they're all individual models basically, so you can use different colours for whichever areas you would like. So for some of the cables, for this darker green, I've used Stegodon Scale Green. And for the eyes, I've used Caliban Green. And for this style of grenade here, I've used Lauren Forest for a base coat. For the brown leather pouch, I've used Gorthor Brown. And for this other grenade, I've used Mephiston Red. Now, for the tentacles, I've done it for this one and that one. I prepared them with a base coat of Grey Seer, which is going to be ready for doing a wet blend using contrast paint. I've also done that on the cabling going from his mask and on the plasma coil. For any bone areas that I'm going to do in a bit, I've actually used Wraithbone, and that's for the horns, and I've used them for the horns on his plasma gun as well. Any other horns you could use it on as well. And for any models that have a plume on them, I've decided to do them a bright yellow. And for that, because I want it to be quite bright, I have started with a base coat of Uriel Yellow. And that's to do it as a nice bright yellow to finish off. Now that we've got all the base colours down, I'm going to start doing some washes. To begin with, I'm going to do the gold with Reikland Flesh Shade. for any of the bronzy areas, so that would be the Balthasar gold areas that you've done, and if you've done the same as me on this one and you've done the Screaming Bell bit here, I use Agrax Earthshade. I'm also going to use that on the brown pouch here. Like I said, they'll have different ones, will have some different pouches somewhere, generally scattered around them. Then after that, on any of the lead belcher areas, I'm just going to use good old Nuln Oil. I'm also putting the Nuln Oil on any of the silver areas that I've done with the Ironbreaker. For any of the Stegodon scale green areas that I've done, if you wanted to put a wash on there, I'm going to be using Quelia Green Shade. And if you've done this on just the pipes, then it's not strictly necessary, to be honest, but it does help to add a little bit of depth to some areas. So, you know, it doesn't hurt to do it. The Uriel Yellow plumes, I'm going to use Cassandora Yellow. This is a bit of a weaker orange wash, basically, than Fugan Orange. So it will help to maintain that brighter shade from using the Uriel Yellow. If you don't have the Cassandora Yellow wash, then it doesn't hurt just to use Fugan Orange if that's what you've got, because you're just going to highlight back up to a bright yellow anyway. For the Lauren Forest Grenade, I'm going to use Athonian Camo Shade. For the bone areas, I'm going to do some wet blending, and I'm going to do that with two contrast paints. The first one is going to be Skeleton Horde, and for that I'm basically going to paint the whole of the horns. Now, when you're doing this with an area the size of this horn here, where it's quite a large area, you're better off not doing the entire horn first. Better off just laying down on part of the horn with your Skeleton Horde, and then going to my next one, which is going to be Snakebite Leather, and I'm going to work that in from the bottom up. You won't need much of this one because it's quite a strong paint compared to the Skeleton Horde. Just start at the bottom and work it up till you're at the point where you want it. Then you wash your brush off very quickly, and then work the Skeleton Horde and the Snakebite Leather together. Now there you go, that's why you should do it over a smaller area, because the Skeleton Horde can start to dry and it will just tear it. So what you want to do is you can go in and you can reapply some of the Skeleton Horde in a bit wet, a bit fresh, and basically just go between the two colours, working them into each other and getting them to blend through, like that. When you're finished, you have something that looks like that. The nice transition going from the darker brown at the bottom, going through to the lighter brown at the top. The power cabling on his chest and on his plasma gun, I'm also going to do a wet blend using contrast paints. And I'm going to do that the same way I did for the Chaos Champion and for the Dreadnought. And I'm going to start off by using contrast paint Imperial Fist. You want to start by using this one because its pigment level is a lot lower than the green that I'm going to be using, and it will get absolutely swamped by the green. So I start by working in at the top. You can work it fairly thickly, not so thick that you lose control, and work it down to about just a bit more than halfway. And the next one I'm going to use is Contrast Paints Warp Lightning. This is a stronger one. Like I said, this is why you use this second. And I'm going to work it up and then go just past where the transition is and sort of stipple your brush into it to try and work the change in, the blend in. And then what you can do, if the line looks a bit stark, is you can get some more Imperial Fist and go back and sort of work it in to where the green is, and sort of work it backwards and forwards, and sort of go back and forwards between the two until you're happy with the mix, and sort of drag your yellow down into it. There we go. And I'm going to do the same for the plasma gun coils. I'm going to start by working the yellow across fairly thickly and going just past where I want the transition to be. And then afterwards go in with the Warp Lightning whilst the yellow is still wet and sort of start working it across. there we have it. Now, apart from the tentacles and the shoulder pad that I'm going to be showing later, that's all the base colours and washes done. So we're going to move on and we're going to do the highlights. To begin with, I'm going to do the largest area, which is all the purple armour. And for that, I'm going to be using Decalia Lilac. This is the longest part of painting any of these models. So all you can do is just take your time and just slowly pick out all your edges. Things like round here, this is just a tale of practice really. And just keep going around as slowly as you can, trying to follow the line left over by the wash. Unfortunately, this is one of the ones which just takes a long time to do and there is no rushing it. And to be quite honest, she didn't feel inclined to spend the time going around picking out all of these edges. You can very easily just do the more raised areas, such as rivets and stuff. After all the armour's been outlined, I'm going to go to highlighting the black that I put on the gun and the grenade. This is also the same black that I've used on the chainswords and the bolters on the other models. For this one, I'm just going to use some Thunderhawk blue and just pick out the edges of it as carefully as I can. The next parts I'm going to highlight is going to be any of the areas that I've used the Stegodon Scale Green on. For that, firstly, I'm going to reapply the Stegodon Scale Green. This doesn't really make a huge difference, so you can miss this step out if you want to, but it does add a little bit of extra depth and it's fairly quick and easy to do, so I'd recommend it. After that, I'm going to take some Sotec Green and apply that in just over the uppermost areas of these cables. And if you apply this highlight in a sort of a flicking motion across it, you get a sort of an impression of texture to the cables. And you'll make it look like they're kind of pulsing almost. When it comes to the grip on the plasma rifle, I've just used this Sotec Green to edge highlight the grip. And then to finish off the cabling, I'm going to go up to Temple Guard Blue and apply this just on the absolute topmost part of these cables. And this one again, if you're doing sort of ticking, flicking motion with your brush, it makes it almost look like the sculpted cabling on their chests. You can go further with this if you really wanted to, but we are just trying to get a relatively simple tabletop here that just looks fairly decent and eye-catching. So there's no real need to go too far beyond this. But feel free to if you want to, obviously. And for the Mephiston Red grenade that I've done, I'm just going to use a little bit of Evil Sun's Scarlet. And just quickly, I'm going to highlight this Gorthal Brown pouch that I've done. And for this, I'm going to be using a little bit of Baneblade Brown. And it's just carefully pick out the edges. And then for the frag grenade that I've done around here with Lauren Forest, I'm going to use a little bit of Strachan Green. Now, you don't have to go really nuts and edge highlight these because they're really, really small. You're hardly going to notice them, and this is just for fun. So a little dot just in the corner, almost like you're painting gems, is really all you need to put that little bit of highlight on something this size and draw the eye to it. For the yellow to green contrast paint blend, we're going to use two colours to highlight this. The first one for the yellow is going to be Dawn Yellow. And that is just going to be used on the yellow parts, obviously, and you can pick out the edges like that. And for the green parts, we are going to use Gauss Blaster Green. Now for this, as you can see, I'm not picking out the entirety of the raised surface, just the uppermost part of it. So that way it looks like it's glowing up from the top. And with the Dawn Yellow, if you use that to go a little bit over the blend between the yellow and the green, that will help it, or at least it seems to almost help to solidify that blend between the two colours. And you do exactly the same for the plasma coil. After that, I'm going to do his eyes quickly. And to begin with, I'm going to start with Warpstone Glow. Just very carefully put onto the eye lenses to pick them out. And then to finish off, going with a tiny dot of Moot Green. Next up, I'm going to start highlighting the metallics. I'm going to start by highlighting the gold. I'm going to do that with Liberator Gold. And I'm just going to pick out the raised areas on any of them like that. And the shoulder pads is just a simple case of turn the model around to an angle that allows you to skim the brush along the edges of them. Then for the Balthazar Gold areas that I've done, I'm going to edge highlight this with Sycorax Bronze. And for these teeth, I'm going to highlight them using Hashite Copper. This is just a case of picking them out as carefully as you can. And for any of the areas that we've done in Lead Belcher, I'm going to start by highlighting these with Ironbreaker. And I'm also going to use the Ironbreaker to go back over the skulls after we've done the Null Noil on there, just to brighten them back up again. And then to finish off the silver skulls, I'm going to take some Runefang Steel and just apply a final highlight to these. Next up for highlighting is going to be the Yellow Plume. And to start with, I'm going to begin by reapplying the Uriel Yellow. And I'm just going to kind of put my brush on a side angle to it and try and overbrush to catch the textures of it. If you have very little paint on your brush, it makes this a bit easier to do. And just carefully go over it. Now, if you do make any mistakes and fill in a bit too much, you can just go back in with your Cassandora Yellow and reapply the wash in a more targeted way. But if you try and make sure there's as little paint on your bristles as possible and hold the model in such a way where you can hold bristles like side onto it, then it's not really too difficult, to be honest. And then to finish off, I'm going to take some Flash Gits Yellow and do the same overbrushing technique here, but try to aim it only on the more raised areas. And then as a final touch, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I think this adds a nice little extra point of highlight, is to take some Dawn Yellow and just do this on the very top of it, top of the plume like this. And then I'm also going to do where it starts to curl up, I'm going to do there as well on a few strands. Now for the horns, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some Ushapti bone, and I'm going to take a fairly thin pointed brush. For this one I'm using a Green Stuff Worlds size 1 for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to thin the Ushapti bone down a little bit more than you normally would, and I'm going to start at the top here where we've got the lighter colour, and I'm just going to draw lines as thin as I can, following down the horn to about there, whilst at the same time sort of blocking it in a bit at the top to lighten that up. You don't necessarily want to make these lines perfectly even all the way through either. You want to try and maintain a sort of a natural bone look, and then you can do the lines of varied lengths. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a second time with the same colour and just apply it over slightly less of the area, not by much, and maybe just in slightly more uneven, so that where you've thinned the paints down, that'll add a variety of tone and it'll add that impression of texture. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some Screaming Skull. Now I'm going to thin this down the same as I did for the Ushapti bone, and I'm going to apply it onto the horns in a similar way, except this time I'm going to cover slightly less area and aim it more at the top. And just one more thing before we get to painting these tentacles, and that is going to be this sculpted shoulder pad, which is from a whole set that GW released back in the day for the Chaos Space Marine range when they released these models back in 2nd edition. For this one, I wanted to do it quite a nice bright turquoise colour, similar to the cables, but I lost the filming when I initially put the base colours down, so I'm going to run through them quickly first. To begin with, what I did was I gave the shoulder pad a coat of Sotek Green, and the teeth a coat of Ushapti bone. And for a wash on the teeth, it was just Agrax Earthshade. But for the actual Sotek Green, what I did was I took 1 part contrast paint Pterodon Turquoise and mixed it with 4 parts contrast medium. And I used that as the initial wash over the turquoise colour. As you can see, I've done the teeth quite quickly now. All I did was I highlighted them up with Ushapti bone, and then finished it off with a final highlight of Screaming Skull on the teeth. Now for the face, After the wash, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reapply Sculpting green. I'm just going to try and do it as neatly as possible and leave the wash darkened in the recesses. And thankfully, these have really expressive faces, so there's plenty of detail to follow. And there we go. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some temple guard glue and I'm going to mix it about 50-50 with the Sculpting green. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it over slightly less area and there's more of a highlight, more targeted highlight. So this is to start adding some more brightness to this shoulder pad. And then to finish off this, what I will do is I'm going to take some pure temple guard blue and just add it as a final pinpoint highlight on some of the brighter areas. So it'd be like the edge of his nose, his brows and his eyebrows, and around the edges of his lips. And there you have it. And to finish this off, I've taken some Uriel yellow and dotted it on the eyes. And then to complete that, I'm going to take a little tiny dot of Dawn yellow, and I'm just going to dot that in the very, very center of the pupil. Just a gentle little dink, just to give it that brightness. And there we go. And now we finally get to the part that you've all been waiting for. The part where I start to paint these tentacles that I sculpted at the very beginning of the video. The first one I'm going to go for is this green, sinewy sort of looking tentacle. And to begin with, how I'm going to do that is I'm going to start with a base coat of warg flesh. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to get this over the whole thing. Now I've base coated this in Contrast Paints Grey Sear, but any sort of a light colour will do, like a light grey or a white, or you can just do it in your standard grey really. It should take you a couple of coats to get a decent opaque coverage of this paint over this to begin with. You want to try and keep as much of your sculpted detail visible as possible. After the warg flesh has dried, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it an all-over wash of Contrast Paints Creed Camo. This is quite a nice dark green, so it's going to help make all that sculpted detail pop. And you don't want to apply this too thickly. I would just be painting this on here and trying to guide it into the recesses that I've got sculpted. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in with Lauren Forest and I'm going to basically try my best to paint each of these tentacles and start bringing them up. And again, I'm using my Green Stuffs World size 1 for this. And I'm just going to go around and carefully try and pick out all the tentacles that I've got sculpted onto this and leave the darker green visible. If you thin this down as well, this isn't going to do perfect coverage first time off. So it's going to allow you to build up the colour. And then when there's areas like this where I haven't sculpted on any tentacle fibres, I'm actually going to try and paint in the impression of a bit of texture. So I'm going to take the Lauren Forest and again have it fairly thin down. And I'm just going to try and paint it in an interesting sort of pattern. And do that by sort of stippling it on randomly whilst trying to create the impression of muscle fibres or something underneath it. And the good thing is you don't have to be anatomically accurate at all, just basically paint it so it looks like there's something there. Next up, I'm going to take some Elysian green and I'm going to go target this more in the centre and trying to make the detail that I've painted on there more evident. And I'm going to apply this in a sort of a stippling motion as well, so it starts to really help to bring out the texture we want to be, want it to look like there is on these sort of sinews. And I'm just going to go around picking out all of these individual sinewy parts of this tentacle and just see if I can add some more interest to it. And then for the final touch, to finish it off, I'm going to take some Ogrin Camo, and this is just going to go on very, very, very uppermost parts of any of the tentacle sinewy bits in just some tiny dots. And there it is, all finished and highlighted. Some of the texture behind it, it's not bad. It's not quite what I wanted to try and achieve, but I'm fairly pleased with it in the end. And that just goes to show that you can rescue quite a bit with a fairly simple paint job. And it looks suitably mutated, at least, I think. And whilst it may not have been exactly what I was going for and trying to imitate, I think it's a bit chunkier than the original, than the one in the Codex. But now that it's painted up, it looks pretty good. And then finally, I'm going to do this tentacle here with 3 separate arms to it. And when you look at the picture, you can see this has a lovely transition from a bright pink down to a nice dark blue at the base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by painting the bulk of this tentacle in Emperor's Children. This is just going to give it a nice base pink to work up from. And it's just a case of getting this down to begin with. I am, however, not going to paint this in right at the base, but I am going to do a couple of little lines just to start bringing it through. Otherwise, I'm not going to get solid coverage down by the base of the tentacles there. Once the Emperor's Children's dried, I'm actually going to take some Xerius Purple, thin this down a little bit more than you normally would possibly, and then I'm going to do a sort of wet blend. So what I'm going to do is with the Xerius Purple, I'm going to go in on the bottom here and I'm going to put it on a little bit thicker than you might normally would, but where you thin this down, it won't fill in any detail. Then I'm very quickly going to take some more Emperor's Children, thin down, and then wet blend that between the two. And through that, you sort of take your brush like this and mix the 2 paints on the model between each other like this. And you sort of, it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, you sort of work backwards and forwards between the 2 colours until you're happy with where you're at with it. You're going to keep working it backwards and forwards like this, blending the 2 colours into each other. And you'll see that it's actually not a difficult technique to do, as you might be worried it is. And sort of just go backwards and forwards between your 2 colours and sort of blend it on the model as you go. Because when we apply some washes to it and some highlights, it'll help to smoothen that out a bit. And the good thing about this technique is that it doesn't require you to be really perfectly neat. You just want to sort of get the paint on there. But if there's bits you want to work out to be brighter, you think you've gone a bit dark, just go back in with your Emperor's Children and brighten it back up again. Sort of a backwards and forwards between the 2 colours. There we go. And that's quite a nice little wet blend done. And then once that wet blend has dried, I'm going to go in with a contrast paint wash. And I'm going to use 4 parts contrast medium to 1 part Volupus pink. And I'm just going to paint this over the whole thing. Doesn't really matter about getting it on the purple parts that we've done, because we're going to go in with a purple wash as well. And then the final wash I'm going to do is a mix of 6 parts contrast medium to 1 part shyish purple. And this one, don't get much on your brush for this, because it's a very strong purple. And just sort of put it down at the very base where we had that purple colour blend. And that's all you really have to do for that. And there we have the basis ready to be highlighted. Now that the washes have dried, we're going to start highlighting. And for that, I'm going to start with Emperor's Children, and I'm going to thin this down a little bit more than I normally would. And I'm just going to start layering it on from the tips going back towards the base of it. And what I'm going to do as I start to get towards the base of it is I'm going to thin this paint down even more so it's virtually a glaze. I'll show you my thumbnail. Right, it's not even visible on my thumbnail, that's how thin this is. And I'm going to sort of take it from where our colours blending is and just sort of feather it up from the darker area. And then for the bottom part where the purple is, I'm going to take the Xerius Purple again and just right down at the bottom, sort of pick out the more raised areas. After that, I'm going to mix a highlight of 2 parts Fulgrim Pink to 1 part Emperor's Children, roughly. And we're going to use that just to paint onto the more central areas and around any sort of details that we've got. And this is going to start to bring out that detail a bit more. And then to finish off the pink parts, what we are going to do is take some pure Fulgrim Pink and use this to go around some of the very sharpest details that we've sculpted in. So anything like that, and around any of the little suction hole parts that we've done. You know, feel free, bit of artistic license with them. There's nothing set in stone. This is a mutation after all. And then finally, to finish it off, I'm going to take a little bit of Gene Stealer purple and just highlight some of the texture that we've managed to get on the very bottom part of it here, and just sort of work it up into it. And there we go. And here we have the two finished Chaos Space Marines with the tentacles fully painted up. As I said earlier, the green one is a little bit chunkier than I actually was hoping to achieve in the first place. But with this paint job, I think it does actually manage to pull off quite nicely, and I'm relatively pleased with it. The pinker one, I'm actually generally all round quite chuffed with it, and it wasn't as difficult as I thought. It was a little bit fiddly, so if you are going to attempt this yourself, just have some patience and go with it, and it'll work out right in the end. And plus remember as well that these are mutations, so they don't have to look perfect. But even so, I'm actually quite pleased with these. And when they're all together with the full squad, I think they'd look quite impressive and ready to appear out of nowhere and cause some real mischief for the Emperor's children. This project has been an awful lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed a little bit of extra green stuff work. And trying this out has shown that with a little bit of practice and a little bit of patience, you can actually achieve some quite nice results. And I do highly encourage everybody out there to actually give this a go. It's an awful lot of fun, and the results can be very rewarding. And there we have it. That is the Emperor's Children's veterans all painted up ready for Jason from Bring About Wargaming. And I really hope that he enjoys using them in some games once that entire army is finished up. Again, I would also like to apologise for being the first video I've managed to put out this year, but I'm very happy to have finally got this video done. It was an awful lot of fun to do, and I highly encourage people out there to give this sort of thing a go. If you did skip to the 43-minute mark, because this was quite a long video, and I don't blame you at all, but thank you very much anyway for watching right to the end and getting all the way through it. I hope you've enjoyed the video. And finally, in the description below, there'll be a link to my commission painting website where you can have a look at galleries, price lists if you fancy getting any commissions done, as well as a link to a Ko-fi account if you fancy making any sort of a donation or anything else like that. No obligation, whatever, but it's just down there, okay? So thank you very much. So with that, stay smiling and keep the old hammer alive.